everyone, Susan Storm here, the founder of Psychology Junkie and a certified MBTI practitioner. Today I want to talk about the difference between the INTJ and the INTP personality types. I get a lot of emails from people who are confused about which type fits them best, and many people end up getting mistyped, thinking they're one type when they're really another. So I want to clarify the differences between these types in a way that's easy for anyone to understand, no matter how new you are to the type world. So let's start by talking about the most obvious difference. INTJs have a J at the end of their type code, whereas INTPs have a P at the end of their type code. The J stands for judger, and the P stands for perceiver. What does this mean? It confuses a lot of people. It confused me at the beginning of my type journey. So judgers approach their day with a sense of structure. They like having a plan and knowing what to expect. They tend to organize their time in order to most effectively reach their goals. Many people in type say that the judger happens to their day, whereas the day happens to the perceiver. What this means is INTJs are going to approach their day with a clear set of objectives, and no matter what happens, they're going to try to achieve those objectives independent of whatever fluctuations occur throughout the day. INTPs are perceiving types. They have a more exploratory approach to life. When I say the day happens to them, it doesn't mean they're at the mercy of their day. It means that they are more flexible to adapt to whatever occurs throughout their day and change courses and be more spontaneous and go with the flow a little bit more easily. While they may still have objectives and goals throughout their day, they are much more comfortable with taking the day as it comes and coming up with goals in the moment that they're wanting to achieve in the moment. So that's one of these big differences between the two types. When you're with an INTJ, you will notice they have a plan, a structure, a goal, and they have a pretty clear roadmap of where they want their life to go. Whereas INTPs are more casual, they are more flexible and adaptable, and they're more comfortable with changing course if the needs of the day demand it, whereas an INTJ can get really stressed when something unexpected happens and they have to change course. They don't like veering off course, whereas INTPs are more comfortable taking another trail and kind of seeing where that leads. So this is one of the main two differences between these types. Next, they both use intuition differently. So INTJs use a cognitive function called introverted intuition. Now, you don't have to be an expert on cognitive functions. I know a lot of people get lost here. These are basically the mental processes we use when we interpret the world and make decisions. Introverted intuition is an inner process. It's going on inside the mind, and it's focused on understanding ripple effects, how one thing happening now will affect something way in the distant future. And introverted intuition is also interested in anything abstract, anything conceptual, a theory, an idea, an insight. They're interested in understanding the dance of the universe and why we're all here and these big picture questions. But this process is going on very much on the inside. It may not be very evident to people on the outside. Now, introverted intuition is also interested in plausibility. They will create possibilities in their own mind and then constantly discard them, trying to find the one possibility that is most plausible, the one possibility that is most likely to actually come to fruition. And then they will put all their energy into either achieving this possibility or circumventing and avoiding it. So this is when INTJs do have an insight. When you're with them and they say, I think this is going to happen, there is going to be a very definite certainty to it. And INTPs, in contrast, use a process called extroverted intuition. Extroverted intuition interacts with the outer environment. So INTPs really enjoy brainstorming and bouncing ideas off other people because it's an extroverted process, which means it's related to the outer world and it gets its energy through interaction. So INTPs can have a really good time theorizing out loud, coming up with possibilities out loud with other people, and they're often sparked. Their inspiration is often sparked by things that are happening in the world around them. It's not as much of an inner process as it is for the INTJ. INTJs can actually find brainstorming very stressful and even annoying because they've already done all that parsing out of ideas inside. They've already discarded all these what they see as useless ideas to get to the one that they think really matters, whereas INTPs really enjoy exploring more and more and more ideas and generating more, and that process is something that they enjoy engaging with other people. whether that's through an online forum or whether that's while having drinks with friends. But having that process of brainstorming and idea generating often needs something in the external world for an INTP to make it really satisfying. INTJs also and INTPs also use thinking differently. INTJs use a process called extroverted thinking, whereas INTPs use a process called introverted thinking. So INTJs, when they learn and they apply logic, they're applying it to the world around them. Because their thinking is extroverted, it needs some sort of external stimulus, and it's about making an impact in the external world. So INTJs learn in order to make something happen in the world around them. They're very focused on metrics, efficiency, ROI, return on investment, and external impact. So as an example, if you give an INTJ a new phone, they're probably going to figure out how to use it to achieve an objective right away. Make a phone call, do an audio recording, organize their calendar. They're going to have clear objectives about how they're going to use the phone, and they're going to learn more about it in order to be able to use it effectively. If you give an INTP a phone, they use a process called introverted thinking. Introverted thinking is less about organizing the world outside oneself, and it's more about organizing your own mind in order to achieve clarity and radical accuracy and truth. So you give an INTP a phone, and they're more likely to be tempted to take that phone apart to figure out how it works. An INTJ learning is in order to use something effectively in the outer world, whereas INTPs often learn for the sake of learning because they want to understand in depth all the components of how something works. For an INTP, getting to the absolute most accurate information is really, really important. And INTJs often have these big external goals that they want to create. Now, INTPs can enjoy that as well, but the process of understanding, that's the big driving motivation for them, is to understand and to have clarity. And when you're arguing with an INTP, you'll find that they often feel tempted to correct little logical fallacies because that's messing up the clarity of their thinking. And nothing's going to work in their mind if you have messy thinking, if you have logical inconsistencies. An INTJ might let a few logical inconsistencies slide if overall your main point is logical. They're less concerned with dissecting the nitty-gritty components of an argument and more about the main point making sense. The INTPs tend to have a more pedantic quality than INTJs. INTJs are going to kind of look for the gist of what someone is saying, whereas INTPs are going to look for the clarity of all the pieces of the argument. Now, both types, being thinkers, are very concerned with logic. Both types tend to hate logical inconsistencies. But again, for the INTJ, it's more, what is your main point and how is that relevant, and what's the logic there of the main overall point you're going to make. Whereas with an INTP, if you're trying to make an argument, they're going to get frustrated if along the way there's lots of little discrepancies and logical fallacies, and they will try to fix those along the way. And this is really important for them because this is what helps them really have that clear thinking. And one of the ways that INTPs really show they care is by helping people clarify their thoughts and have clearer thinking. And that's one of the reasons that they have a reputation for being argumentative. And many people see it as being a really negative thing. People see arguing as being inherently confrontational, whereas INTPs and ENTPs really don't see it that way. In their mind, they're helping people to have clearer thinking, and what could be more important than that? They're helping people get to the truth, and what could be more important than that? So for INTPs, having these arguments, it's actually in many cases a way that they show support and care to other people. And sadly, many times it's just thrown in their face, and they're seen as being rebellious or defiant or needlessly difficult. INTJs don't really want to get into any argument that is going to detract from the main point. There's a very intense focus of the INTJ on the main idea, the main goal, and a singular objective or insight. And so if there's little messy thinking from someone they're talking to along the way, they might just overlook it to get to the main point. And they may not see it as worth their time to try to correct the other person's thinking. They're less concerned with that. What they're more concerned with is proving their insight and giving the other person an insight into the deeper meaning of something or into the efficacy of a particular strategy or objective. Next, INTJs and INTPs have different ways of experiencing their feeling function. So even though they're thinking types, they both still have a feeling preference. So for INTJs, that feeling preference is called introverted feeling, and it's their tertiary function. So it's, even if you don't know about function placements, that's okay. Let's just get to the main point. Here we go. INTJs are usually highly aware of their feelings, but they tend to sweep them under the rug to focus instead on their objectives and goals. They do not want their feelings to get in the way of what needs to be done. But they still are conscious of their feelings, and they still have a very strong sense of what they believe matters to them as an individual, and they still have a strong set of personal ethics. What they believe is right no matter what, and they tend to be deeply loyal to these ethics. INTJs feel much more deeply than people realize on the outside because they tend to have this very independent, stoic, pragmatic quality. People often think of them as being kind of unfeeling, but actually on the inside they have very intense emotions. The issue is INTJs don't necessarily feel a compulsion to share those feelings. It's an introverted process. That means the process is going on inside themselves. One thing I read, I think it was in Lenore Thompson's book about personality type. I'll try to get the title in the description. She said that for introverted feeling types, there's a thought process of, I love you, but it's none of your business with significant others and family members. They might feel deeply for someone, but they don't necessarily feel a compulsion to talk about it. In fact, talking about it and expressing all their feelings out loud can feel almost like it's cheapening the inner experience for them. So they tend to keep a lot of their feelings close to the chest, either because they feel like it's irrelevant, they feel like it's not, that it's cheapening the experience, or they feel vulnerable in talking about those feelings, or they don't have a level of trust with the other person to talk about them. INTPs, in contrast, use a process called extroverted feeling. And extroverted feeling is a dynamic process. It's one that needs interaction with the world outside oneself. INTPs are actually fairly aware of how other people are feeling, but they have a lot of uncertainty about this because extroverted feeling is their inferior function, and the inferior function is one where we tend to feel a lot of uncertainty and insecurity and vulnerability. So INTPs tend to pick up on a lot of other people's emotions, but they don't feel confident in outright saying, here's what you're going through, let's talk about it. They tend to hold back, afraid that they might say the wrong thing, or they might negatively impact the emotional mood of the room or the emotions of the other person that they're with. INTPs have a much harder time assessing their own feelings. It's much harder for them to understand what's really going on for them emotionally. And if you ask an INTP, tell me about your feelings and emotions, usually they're going to quiet down and need a long time to try to analyze this and process it and find it because it just feels so hazy and confusing to them. Whereas INTJs usually know what their feelings are. There might be times where there's confusion, but a lot of times they're fairly sure because they do have introverted feeling. They're more aware of the feelings inside themselves versus extroverted feeling, which is more aware of the feelings outside oneself. So INTPs they're fairly cognizant of emotions, vibes, and moods going on around them, whereas INTJs are more conscious of their own inner feeling states, and they're less concerned with the emotions of everyone else. This doesn't mean they don't care. I know, as an INTJ mother, I do definitely care about the emotions of my children or my husband, for example. But if I'm in another place and there's a lot of emotional turmoil or people are feeling really upset, I might just have a very detached, analytical approach and really not be affected by it very much. Whereas with someone that's deeply important to me, it will definitely matter. So INTJs are processing the feelings inside themselves and they're more cognizant of those. INTPs, more cognizant of the emotions around themselves and less conscious of the feelings in their own inner feeling states. INTJs can have this approach of, I love you, but it's none of your business. Whereas INTPs, when they really care about someone, they really have a desire to express it. They might feel vulnerable expressing it. They might be insecurity there, and they might not know how to do it, so they might hold back. But there's still a desire to express that because they use a process called extroverted feeling. And in fact, when INTPs are very, very stressed, they can become a little bit more needy of the other person and become more concerned about where they stand with others emotionally. And that brings us to our last point, and that is grip stress. So each personality type, when they first begin to experience stress, tends to become more true to type. So an INTJ will become more reserved, they'll become more direct and logical and focused on getting things done and creating the plan. INTPs will become more reserved, become more quiet, they become more focused in thought and analysis to the point of analysis paralysis in many cases. But what happens when their normal tactics don't work? If an INTJ is doing their INTJ thing and trying to get away and strategize and come up with a perfect plan and nothing's working, then what can happen is they can fall into the grip of their inferior function, which for INTJ is extroverted sensing. And when INTJs are in the grip of extroverted sensing, they tend to become more indulgent, reckless, and pleasure-seeking than usual. Usually, INTJs are very disciplined and controlled, but when they're in the grip of really extreme or chronic stress, they suddenly may find themselves flipping a switch and becoming more indulgent, making more reckless or impulsive decisions, and being more focused on sensory enjoyment and pleasure. This can show up as overeating, it can show up as over-exercising, spending too much money, drinking too much. It can show up in these very sensory experiences. INTPs, in contrast, have inferior extroverted feeling. So when they first experience stress, they're going to pull away, they're going to try to analyze the problem, look at the logic of it, see if there's any possibilities they might not have thought of. But if their normal solutions aren't working, then they can fall into the grip of extroverted feeling, and suddenly they can become overwhelmed by their relationships, where they stand with people. They can start feeling very insecure. They might wonder whether anyone even likes them at all. They might feel a compulsion to reach out to people and try to have a good connection with them, try to ask, like, how do you feel about me? Have I done anything wrong to upset you? Is there anything I need to do? They start becoming very concerned about relationships and connections, and they might feel really overwhelmed by this whole process because usually they're very just detached and cool and logical. So you might notice, if you're one of these types, look at how you normally behave under moments of intense stress. Are you more of an indulger, or are you more of an emoter? INTPs become more emotional when they're in the grip of their inferior function, whereas INTJs become more impulsive and indulgent when they're in the grip of their inferior function. I hope this has been helpful. If you have any questions, be sure to leave me a comment. You can find out much more on my website at psychologyjunkie.com. You can also check out my ebooks. I have one specifically for INTJs called The INTJ Understanding the Strategist, and I have one specifically for, well, not specific, I have one for all the types called Discovering You, Unlocking the Power of Personality Type. Thanks so much for watching this video. I hope to hear from you. Like and subscribe for more, and see you next time. Bye, everyone.